taxes, and we're going to just delve on some of those costs actually that do come into place. We've also given you on your sheet an opportunity for you to perhaps scribble down now today or afterwards. Just make some notes of what actually is involved in your estate, what actually is included. And I think it's quite important that we start to put some values to that. Those are your assets, such as your home, potentially a second home, a family holiday home, etc. That's perhaps a bank account that you may have. It's your investments. It's your motor vehicles. It's your business interests. Anything that you own is going to form part of your estate. And depending on how you've structured your will and your estate, it's either going to be everything in South Africa and everything worldwide. So it's quite important that we don't think, well, we've got an asset that's sitting offshore, it's going to escape the South African law. There are ways, there are rules, there are certain parameters where it is excluded from a local estate, but your will has to then be specific that it is only covering your South African assets. So we are going to be having further talks after tonight where we will talk about foreign assets, where we'll talk about the need for foreign wills, but it's extremely important to have an idea of what you actually own. So all of those policies, all of those amounts, because anytime you're doing an estate plan, it's extremely important that those numbers are considered. If we move on to the next slide, we're going to just paint a little bit of a picture. And yeah, it's hot out. She thinks she's going to sit down all night. No. If we think of it, we're going to just paint a couple of pictures and then we're going to start discussing. That's why all three of us are standing up here. And if we just have a look at it, and for this particular picture, we've said that we have a scenario and we have this individual, Robert. He's 35 years old. He has passed away in a vehicle accident. He's been married for 10 years and he's married community of property. And he has 2 children, 1 3 and 1 7. It's tragic. It's really extremely sad. And we need to then say, what's the next step? The first thing that happens, and it's really sad, I'm sure we've all had some experiences, everybody starts saying, well, how do we fund a funeral? Where do we find some funds to have a funeral? And funeral policies, we could have a discussion on that on its own. It's important that there is provision for that, be it in a funeral policy, be it in a Discovery Life policy that has immediate access to 50,000 Rand, provided your policy is 2 years or older, be it in a credit card that can be repaid from a life policy or some investment, etc. But it's important that there's some access and that the people that are going to be left behind to take care of this special event needs to know how they're going to fund it. The next question inevitably is there a will? And that's where the big question comes in. Yes or no? And sadly, in this instance, there's no will. So I'd like you perhaps just to share some of your experience of what happens if there's no will. What is the scenario? We hear of all sorts of crazy things where the government will take everything and we'll lose everything. So what actually does happen, Zane? Maybe you can share with us some of those scenarios.
Okay, so what happens when a client passes away without a will? In South Africa, there's something called the Interstate Succession Act that determines how your estate will be distributed if you don't have a will. Now, that might not be in accordance with what you wish. So, for instance, if you are married and you have a spouse and a child, your estate will then be divided in terms of interstate succession, and then your spouse will receive the greater of 250,000 or a child's share. A child's share is your estate divided by the number of children plus spouses. So if you have 2 children, which is the case here, 2 children and a spouse, the estate will then be divided by 3. Okay. So if you look at this case, we are assuming that the value of the estate is 3 million. The client is married in community of property. That means that if you're married in community of property, you have 1 joint estate, and the parties to the marriage have 50% share of the joint estate. And Now, if we look at what the child's share is in this estate, the child's share will then be 500,000 for the spouse and the two children. Do you understand so far where I am? Please let me know if you have any questions. Okay. The reason it's 500,000 is because 3 million is the value of the joint estate. Half share for each spouse is then 1.5. Then the 1.5, which belongs to the deceased spouse, will then be divided into several estates, which in this case is 500,000 for each individual. And then, yeah, then you need to think about, is that fair? Do you want each of your family members to receive 500,000? Would you prefer that the whole entire estate goes to the spouse, and then the spouse will look after the children? What do you want to happen after that?
A lot of times people will say, my estate is worth X. I'm forgetting that it's actually only worth half of X because of the way they're married. Community of property is easy and simple. A and C with accrual is very similar to a community of property. It just had a start value at the beginning of the marriage that has grown over the years and will then be offset against the combined estate. So very important if you're married community of property, A and C with the accrual, that we're thinking very wisely and smartly about those numbers.
And just to add to that, if you're married with the group, right, you have a contract, and this contract says that when we started this marriage, the value of my estate was 0, or the value of my estate was X. And then you can add to that and say that in terms of the accrual, these assets must be excluded when calculating your accrual. However, let's look at a case of you started a marriage, you're married out with accrual, and the value of both your estates is 0, 0. Effectively, you are married in a community of property. Effectively. It's not true, but effectively it's in a community of property. The reason for that is you are saying that when I started this marriage, the value of my estate was 0, my spouse's estate was 0. Anything that we have after that is then going to be divided equally. So if you then pass away, there's going to be an accrual claim from your estate. So let's say I pass away and I'm the one who has X amount. I have 5 million. My spouse still has 0. I pass away, I'm thinking that the value of my estate is 5 million. But there's an accrual claim against my estate. The accrual claim, forgetting everything else, forgetting liabilities, forgetting everything else, just look at an accrual claim without thinking about everything else. The accrual claim is then going to be 2.5, which means that when I pass away, my spouse has a claim of 2.5 against my estate. Which means that when I then plan to distribute, I'm not distributing 5 million. I'm only distributing 2.5. That's the thing that you need to think about when talking about it.
And also establishing a marriage contract, marital contract.
You may ask, why go into a marriage A and C then? Well, we've done lots of research of our daughter's wedding, so I can tell you very honestly that it's a case of separating liability, separating debt. So whatever debt you're accruing remains in your estate and vice versa. So there are pros and cons, which is why A and C with accrual is considered as a marital regime that is possible for. Well, Lindsay, we could have a debate about that.
That's the most, potentially the most fair.
If we then move on to poor old Robert and his family, we could say that the money distribution is incidental. That's okay. Children are only 3 and 7. They're minors. They cannot inherit. So by default, intestate law of succession is saying they will inherit. And the law of the land will dictate that they must inherit. But as a result of them being minors, it will be paid into the Guardian Fund. Guardian Fund is a fund that is managed by government. It's hard to access. It's tied up with a lot of legislation and a lot of rules and bureaucracy, as you can imagine it should be. Growth rates are low. You don't have control of how those assets are going to be invested and what sort of rates you're going to be getting. And sadly, in June 2023, in News 24, there's a substantial amount of funds that have been lost. So the last thing you want is for the Guardians Fund to be holding your children's inheritance. That, I think, on its own is probably the most important reason why any person with minor children should have a will. So whilst you're sitting here tonight, I'd like you to think of your situations. I'd like you to think of your family's situations and then your friends and your relatives and everybody else that's around you, and share the news, because it's actually extremely, extremely important in our opinion. So now I ask the question, is it fair? And I don't know what fair is when anybody has passed away and there's a will and it's going to be distributed. And it's a very difficult question to answer. But some of the thoughts that do go into it is we have a 3-year-old and we have a 7-year-old. That 7-year-old has had 4 more years of care and maintenance than the 3-year-old. Should it be split evenly? Shouldn't it? And it can be open for debate. There's no right or wrong. It's what do you need? Where are they? 4 years difference is not the end of the world. 10 years difference is a very big difference, which could and should be potentially considered. What if you have a child with a disability? What if you have a child who's potentially not going to have the same earning capacity and lifestyle opportunities as the other? How do you protect that? And if you haven't got a will, it's almost impossible for that protection to even be thought through, never mind carried out in practice. There's different requirements. There's no one size fits all. And I think that's why it's extremely important to plant some of the seeds and some of the thoughts in terms of how and what a will could and should look like. If we had a scenario where, yes, there was a will, and so now you're getting the camera and you're going to go online and tell us what would happen if there was a will. What would we be looking at?
Just to go back, sorry, I'm going to answer that question, but just to go back to the Guardians Fund slides that we had earlier on. How do you avoid your children's inheritance going to the Guardians Fund? So one thing you can do is you draft a will, and in your will you can say that if my children are under the age of 21, 25, 30, whatever age you choose, I want the funds to go into a testamentary trust until they turn that age. That way the money will not go to the Guardians Fund. It will go into the trust, and your trustees will then look after the funds until the children turn 21, 25, whatever age.
18 is a major. Used to be 21 in our previous laws, changed to 18. But you have the freedom of testation to determine what age the beneficiaries, the children, can acquire their capital.
Is it good to discuss your will with your peers and your family before you talk to them? Is that a good idea to give them access to that information or not? Yeah. How does it kill you before the time?
It's probably so dependent on your own situation and your own personal relationships, if that makes sense.
Because we found some instances when you get to the stage of the will, they always upheaval and shock that people are throwing the chair and connecting one another because they have a certain expectancy from that person. Certain item is supposed to go and be without question again. So
I think, speaking from personal experience, my dad died when I was 25 in 1996. And at the time he was invincible. We all thought he was invincible. It was the first death that really rocked our family as such. And it was sudden, a stroke. 3 days later, he wasn't here any longer. When the will was read, it was a very big shock. It was drafted by an attorney with good intentions. If you knew my mom and my dad and the family history and the structure of the family, the one clause in the will said that until she remarried. If you knew my mom, she would never ever remarry. It was never going to happen. That clause just was distasteful in my mom's eyes. It made a lot of sense in this attorney's eyes, but it was, so that question, and there were other shocks and other planned thoughts that were actually quite normal. So it's very difficult to answer that question. And typically when we are assisting our clients in drafting a will, you will know whether there's a shock that's going to surprise them or not. And it's at that choice, whether at that time, whether you make the choice to share that knowledge or that information with them. I believe that it makes sense to share that because it gives you the opportunity to explain it. If my dad had sat opposite my mom and said, listen, this is the reason why it's in there, it would have been incidental. Having said that, if you're going to be cutting somebody out of the will, that's going to cause a lot of problems and issues and fights.
You just don't tell women.
So it's very much against, like Lindsay says, your personal circumstances, what's happening. I caution, particularly when we come to things like choosing a guardian, etc., because you will change your mind. And when you change your mind, you've got to sit them down again and tell them again what's happening. So, you know, there are certain things that I believe could and should be discussed. And then I think there are things that are going to, why do I need to explain to one family member that they're not going to be the guardian? And how and why? Because it could change in a year, 2 years, 3 years time. So it's very personal, Claude. But I think having discussions in the family make it very conducive to having a smooth process. I think what is important is that it's not necessarily only about how things are going to be distributed. What do we want for the business? How do we retire from the business? What happens if I pass away? Because those questions asked to the family members are going to guide you as to whether or not they want that business or not. So it is very personal, and we're here to give you some food for thought in terms of that.
But just to touch on the guardian, if I can come back to you now.
Okay, sorry, you mentioned,
You're not, you're going to go ahead.
so what you mentioned about the guardian fund, right? So to bypass it, so that your children's fund don't go into the guardian fund. You say you should have a testamentary fund. So it's my obligation to take care of my child, even when I'm gone, right? So my child is 9 years old this year. So if I'm gonna have a testamentary trust, who takes care of the child between now and that age?
So you need to have a guardian. So the guardian is the person that takes responsibility of the child. They become you when you're not there. They're going to choose the schools. They're going to make sure they eat. They're going to do everything that you currently do. That's their responsibility, your guardian. The trust is to provide them with funds. The trustee is then responsible for paying for general maintenance, which is claimed by your guardian, for school fees, which is chosen by your guardian. So they're not going to choose a school for your child. That's what the trust is responsible for.
So it's only the balance of the fund
Capital.
that will go to, that will be paid out to them when they reach the age. So
Yeah.
from now until that age, they are still being taken care of
Yeah.
with the same money.
Yes. Yeah.
So Mwaba raises a very interesting point there. You have an obligation to look after your child. If you leave in your will that I'm going to leave everything to the SPCA, there will be a claim against your estate from the guardian to look after and fund the minor. So yes, I can choose what I'm going to do. Laws will dictate what will happen and what can't happen. So yes, you can make provisions, and what we're talking about is making sure that they are the correct provisions. The testamentary trust, and just to touch on that very quickly, you will have heard trusts, people talking about it. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they tax efficient? Are they SARS is watching them and they're going to be shut down, and all sorts of hype around trusts. There are a couple of different types of trusts. A testamentary trust is a trust that is only set up after your death. So it's only set up if it needs to be set up. So it's not going to the expense of getting a trustee drafted, transferring assets into it. That would be a family trust. So we have a testamentary trust that is only created on death, and it explains in the will what is going to happen. The funds are for the child who's 3, and they will be able to access it when they're 30. And until that stage, the trustees have the responsibility to make sure the funds are looked after and are able to maintain the child until they get to there. And when they get to that age, the balance pays across. So very important. Testamentary trust or another type of trust, a family trust that is set up in your lifetime. Place for both of them.
I just want to touch on something else as well. Shirley mentioned earlier on that the age of majority in South Africa is 18. And when I was talking about testamentary trust, I was speaking 21, 25 in those ages. And the reason I'm saying that is I think 18 is too young for most children. If you get a lot of money, let's say you're getting 5 million or even 1 million, you're probably not thinking about your education. You're probably not thinking about varsity. You're only thinking about a car.
Which my board is very happy about because he'll sell it.
And yes. So choosing 18 is a little bit young. I would prefer that you choose above 25, but 21 is still an age that you can work with. But 18, no. 21, I still think no, but it's right.
So we have this will. The name. The first question is it valid? And maybe just talk us through your experience at Absa Trust of what is a valid will.
So a valid will has to be drafted by somebody over the age of 16. They have to be mentally capable. It has to be a written document. It has to be signed by the testator at the end of the document. If there's more than one page, they have to sign each and every page. So we've had cases where a client will draft a will. They call me, they say, Zini, I'd like to draft the will. This is what I want. I draft the will, I send it to them and I say, please sign it. In their mind, just because the will has been drafted, they have a will. But that's not true. If you haven't signed it, there's no will. Okay. We also have clients who will get the will. They'll sign on the last page, but then they don't sign all of the other pages. It's not valid. The master will accept it, which means that we have to go to court to get it validated. And that is very costly. I think we did one a couple of years ago, and at the time, it cost us 80,000 to get the will validated. It's very expensive.
I think just to jump in there, but as well is in this day and age where we just whack an electronic signature on everything, it cannot be an electronic signature. It needs to be an ink signature. So if you have signed a will electronically, you've stored it on your own, everyone knows where it is. It still needs to be printed, signed.
And I also,
We all want to talk.
just to touch on that as well, I had a client who signed their will. They did physical signatures, they got witnesses, everything was done. And then what they did is they scanned it onto their laptop and then they threw away the original. And they thought they had a valid will. Luckily for them, they realized before, because I had to collect the will to keep it in safe custody. And then they said, no, I threw that away. Here's a copy, I'm emailing it to you. And I said, that's not a valid will. You just thrown away the valid one.
Is there such a thing as recorded audio wills?
No.
There are a lot of case law that actually follow through to what is considered a valid law, a valid will and not. Natalia, we're not telling you that what's possible the way. We'll find out if there is a will. Very good question. You go rummaging through everybody's drawers. Through the files. And one of the things that we're going to share with you tonight is a death file. And as horrible as that may sound, is that you start to put together all of the documents that will be needed at signing and winding up the estate. And that's where the original will should be, and that you then make sure it is there. However, having said that, the banks are a very common place for wills to be safe, kept in safekeeping and stored. And all of them have a department where you can send a request with the deceased's ID and their details, and they will then search to tell you what their latest dated will is. The bank should be one of your first places. The insurance houses also hold wills and store wills, attorneys. So when you're rummaging through the deceased's files and cupboards and drawers, we say that in respect, is the looking for places where they would potentially have stored a will, an accountant, an attorney, a fiduciary services company, the banks, the insurance houses, all of those. But hopefully you're going to find something be it on a computer system, be it on a, on a hard.
There's no one central.
Yeah, unfortunately not. And it could be the last valid will that is found. So if you have drawn up a new will and you've signed it and it is valid, but it is never found, the last dated valid will is the will that is going to be considered to be your final one. Which is why it may be important to speak to your family members as to what your wish is, provided you carry it through and sign it.
I was gonna say normally that's the family member executive will pop up very easy.
That's very true too.
Question, written, is that in handwritten or computer?
Computer written and signed, yeah, ink signature. Ink signature. But it can be both, yes.
It can be both.
Yes, it can be both. Can be a handwritten will and signed, or it can be typed out, but signed with
When
it.
you shake, very difficult to write it.
Very difficult. And very important that you've made sure that all of the necessary provisions are in that document.
And then the last thing you need to think about as well is nobody mentioned in the will can be a witness. So if you've drafted a will and you say in your will, I nominate my spouse to inherit everything, your spouse can't then be a witness in your will.
Very important.
Point.
And the executor as well.
No, they can.
Oh.
Yes.
Talk at the moment of having a will each, not a joint. I don't know why that's, what, maybe it's society now.
No, what it
Also,
is,
in other countries, you cannot determine who to leave your money to. You
absolutely.
cannot leave a sibling out.
Absolutely. So I think what we
It's a law. Is that also here?
have freedom of testation in the country, which means that is your choice, provided you're not going against common law. So in answer to Ian's question, valid wills, combined joint wills, where did you come? We used to have a lot of joint wills in the country and it was common practice for a husband and a wife to do it all together and leave it to X, Y, and Z. The difficulty with that is when a will is taken and given into the master, the original document is released and given to the master for him to establish what the wishes are and wind it up. That will never gets returned. And as a result, if the spouse passes away 6 months later, there's no valid will. So that's one of the reasons why we say have separate wills, because Mr.'s will be read, Mrs. will be available to be put in place thereafter. Joint wills are not a problem. You
I
can
just thought
have,
the difference in society now,
no,
where I'm old, you know, you're together. But now, most things are separate. We have friends that have been married 6 times, right? And they've got siblings by different people and all that. So that is a different thing. My age, that would never have happened. Well, not
I
supposed to.
think what's important is you can have a joint will. Tina and I can sign a will together today. We can say and agree that's what it's going to be. Nothing stops me tomorrow going and signing a new will, dating it a day later and changing what my wish was. So yes, it's good to have, it has issues. Natalia.
If it's a joint will and the couple is
Have a new will drawn up. And yes, for that,
will drawn, then
that will is valid. You have a certain period in terms of law
3 months.
where it will be considered not your will. If after 3 months that will has never been changed, it will be seen that that was your wish and it will be carried out as per your final will.
The business about if we've already got a will and one of them passes away, and then we say the original will then goes from your attorney, if that's where the will is, to the master. So does your attorney not get it back then? Is that what you're saying?
Not unless they ask for it and go through a huge massive rigmarole to get it back. But under normal circumstances, absolutely not.
So
It's not a gift.
so then what would happen then? The person that was left behind
Must write a new
will
will.
write a new will.
You can't rule from the grave. If you have a signed joint will and that will is read and you've left it all to your spouse, but in that will it says that if we both die, it's going to go to A, B, and C. That surviving spouse has the freedom to choose what they want to do with their estate. So they can make a change. The fact that they signed a joint will does not hold them liable to carry out the wishes that were signed in that
And,
will.
and if the person left behind doesn't make out a new will straight away,
Potentially die intestate.
so then that money then will go into. Okay.
A divorce does not cancel a will.
Question is, as you get older, and you may end up in a home, there is a law in the States, when it's called undue influence, where a sibling, or maybe just a carer, influences that left person, a single one left, into a will and leaving it all to them. Is that undue influence law?
Very simple. Was I of sound mind and was I able to make my choice?
We had a friend that happened to.
And if they have, would have very weak grounds to apply to court for it to be overturned. So it's very important, if I'm of sound mind, I have the right to decide who will live here. So if they're in a home, there's the family stay close. That's the secret I have. So going on today, we have Robert's wishes. He did have a will. This is a valid will. We've established that now. Let's just talk through some of the, it's so difficult to know what he would have in his will. And we haven't got a sample that we've used here. But let's just talk through some of the opportunities. Who can be an executive?
So in South Africa, you can nominate anyone as an executor. However, when you apply for executorship with the master will ask you to get an agent if you're not an accountant, a lawyer, or a trust company. Okay, so a trust company will be Absa Trust, Citadel, Nedgroup Trust, attorney offices, and all of those places. If you haven't nominated one of those, the master will ask them to get an agent, and then your family will then have to go and look for an agent to assist them with the administration of the estate. Now, at that particular moment, are they really thinking clearly? That might be debatable because you've just passed away. They're going through a lot. Looking for an executor at that time might not be a good idea. Or maybe they don't look for an executor and they wait for a year. Nothing has happened in your estates. Your accounts are frozen.
If we take Claude's example, where he hasn't discussed with his family, it would be extremely dangerous and extremely unfair, in my opinion, to nominate a family member as the executor. However, if he's discussed it, it gives the executor the option to go and negotiate rates with these potential executors that Danae spoken of, which is one of the reasons why some people do nominate the spouse. It is an emotional thing at time of death. I don't think anybody can dispute that at all. And managing that process can be extremely difficult. So be careful when you are nominating your executor. Make sure that it's somebody that is going to be able to run through the process and go through the negotiating skills with anybody who's registered as an executor in the natural course of their business. A co-executor, in my opinion, I'd have said to you a couple of years ago, have one, because they need to be kept informed of the process. The reality of the fact is that as soon as that agent is appointed, the agent becomes responsible and they continue to do everything. So hopefully you're choosing your agent wisely, and hopefully you're choosing your agent that's going to share information with the family through the process. And I have had lots of experience. I'm going to say how many years experience, but it's not possible for me to have that experience. I'm far too young to have that experience. I've had over 20 years experience with just looking at estates through First National Bank through Discovery, through ABSA, through various places. And quite frankly and quite honestly, I can stand here today and say that not FNB, not ABSA, not anybody is good or bad. It depends who gets your file, what their process, their experience is, and how they're going to manage it, and how much you're going to assist them. So it might be, if you ask me who's a good executor, I'm going to tell you there isn't one. It all depends on what's happening in their lives at that time. The more you are prepared, the easier and the better it's going to be for them. Years ago, I'd have sworn by FNB. Now it's dependent on who gets the file. And that's as sad as it is. And you have to trust them, hope and pray that it's going in the right place. Fortunately for me, I don't have very many experiences with the ABSA executorship because none of my clients die. So it's a good omen. I appreciate that omen and I want to live with that one for a long time. But my experience is it's all dependent on what's happening in the master's office, what's happening in the administration company's office at that point in time, and how much the people that are supporting can help by providing the information. We'll share with you hopefully this evening what some of that information needs to be. So executor, very personal choice. Charge for that, legislated, 3.5% plus VAT. 15% VAT, don't forget the 15, it's not 14 anymore. And when you do, that's what they are obliged. They can charge less, they cannot charge more. So extremely important that when you're factoring out, and as I've said, get to that value, 3.5% plus VAT is what would be charged typically for an executor. Negotiations, obviously, and ABSA have an opportunity where you can say, well, depending on what the value of your estate is, they will give you a letter to say, if your estate is valued in X, there will be a reduction of Y on that 3.5%, which makes them an attractive administration company in my opinion. We cannot say that your fee is going to be 1.5% because your estate today might be worth 25 million. And 1.5% is plenty of money to wind it up. However, when you pass away, it might be worth 500,000, and if 1.5% is not economical for them to wind it up. So it's then dependent on the value of the estate. Children inheriting, we've spoken at length about the testamentary trust, and gosh, my word, I take over. So now it's your.
Okay, so in this particular case, the client is married in community of property. So his children are inheriting everything. He wants his children to inherit half of his estate. Now, is he talking about half of the joint estate or is he talking about half of his half? What I find is the majority of the clients think that it's half of the joint estate. I have 3 million, my assets is worth 3 million. I want my kids to receive 50%. But that's not the case. Your asset is actually 1.5. Your children will receive half of 1.5. Is that what you want? Okay. We've spoken about the testamentary trust. We've spoken about the guardian's fund. And then we also need to talk about, is this tax efficient? In South Africa, when you pass away, unfortunately, you pay taxes. There's estate duty tax, and there's also capital gains tax. With estate duty taxes, you pay tax on anything above 3.5 million. The first 30 million, you pay 20%. Over 30 million, you pay 25%. If a spouse is inheriting everything, there's something called the Section 4Q deduction, which means that when you pass away and you leave everything to your spouse, you won't be taxed, but the spouse eventually will when they pass away. Okay.
But it kind of is the most tax efficient way of structuring a lot of your larger assets, possibly that's also in line with your wishes, because then you're saving on the capital gains, the estate duty and things like that.
Yeah, there might be a lot of people in the room that are used to going to leave 3.5 million to my spouse and the balance to somebody else to avoid the estate duty. Those rules have changed in the not too distant future, not too distant past, where it's been accumulated and we have a 7 million. So you don't need to be creative and leave something to that person and that person to avoid that first 3.5 million. Not sure if anyone's aware of it, but I thought that we would be putting it out there laws have changed, 7 million for a family estate.
So the first spouse passing away is still 3.5. When the last spouse passes away, then it's going to become 7 million if the 3.5 hasn't been used. So let's say you pass away and you say, I'm giving 1 million to my kids. Now you've used your 1 million, then your spouse will now have 3.5 plus 2.5. So whatever you haven't used is then going to be covered to your spouse.
We have Harry John who's head of legal at Discovery, and he says he laughs at it every time. It's the last chance that your wife is going to have to roll over. And that's his standard joke, so hopefully Harry's listening.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to understand something. If, say for an example, we are married to contracts, and my wife is worth, let's say, 1 million weeks. If I, it's okay. My estate will be 500,000.
No, it's going to be 1 million because the joint estate is 2 million and you have half of 2 million. But if, let's use another example. If your wife had 500,000 and you had 1.5, your estate is worth 1 million.
I hate to break this news to you both. If your wife has 1 million and you have 1 million, you both have 2 million. Okay, so maybe just split it. In community of property, you don't own anything separate from your wife.
Debt including the debt.
Snap. I'm gonna cook.
But now we could go on to say, let's just go what ifs. And we wanted to get to this stage of the presentation probably a lot quicker so that you could ask questions. But what if Robert didn't die in that accident? He's now on life support. Does he want to be on life support? Is that the best interest for the family? And that opens up a whole load of questions that we couldn't even get into debate tonight. But a living will dictates that you do not want to be on life support. And if that is your wish, and if that is Robert's wish, it's important that that document is signed and readily available and not part of a will. Because this document is only read after death. So if your wish is that you are not put on life support, a living will is the document that you should have signed and have available that your family are aware of so that they can be used at that time.
So is the living will the same in that it has to be signed on every page?
I witness.
Okay.
Doesn't form quite the same legalities, doesn't form part of the Estate Administration Act, but yes, good practice, signed and witnessed. You had a question for?
I wanted to just ask, what was the children outside of the marriage?
They are legally your children. So as long
If
as
your spouse is in the executor, what are the chances of being selfish about giving some of that money?
the executor, as Zanae said, has to be a professional worker. They have to be registered with FISA. They have to comply with all of those laws and those rules. They cannot be selfish.
Something you want to share with us?
And also yourself as data, you can't draft, well, you can draft a will and give everything to the children that you have with your current spouse. But the children from outside the marriage can claim.
And the reason why I asked that, we had a problem with some of our ethical staff with regards to their policies, some of their policies, the wife paid with other 2 children. And said, these are the only 2 children who get the money. And then it was 2 weeks later, there was the other girl who came with her child. I said, no. Somebody must come to this child as well.
So it's a little bit complicated in terms of what type of policy it is, what governs that in the legislation. If it's a retirement annuity, they have to look after all dependents. If it is a life policy and you've nominated a beneficiary, those beneficiaries will receive the money. So there are certain laws and rules that come in from different acts and pieces of legislation. You had a question?
Yeah. I have seen a video recording will in education.
If there's something that is, you think it's like.
No,
Or.
doesn't, it's not valid.
No.
I did not even understand the question, so I'm on another page.
Thing of the world.
A recording of
Voice
not in South Africa.
No.
Those are,
That's so confusing.
those are the movies.
Because I always say to her, I don't want my funeral to exceed 50,000. The expenses, I want it to be less cheap. So she always say I must record that. For
Absolutely.
my funeral.
Record it in the will.
But you can put it, no, like, record it, live photo. So that you can put in your video.
Yes.
It's extremely important when you have traditional funerals where the family will be going, that's what he wants, and no, that's not what he wanted. I know he didn't want that. So having a recording of that just nullifies any potential of that's not what he wanted. But a valid will is going to be different.
I was spending money on you, I was just gonna spend it on the new boy. That's why.
So surely what determines a ruling from the grave?
Ruling from the grave is saying,
I'm asking, for example, he has wishes. But now, when do we say he's ruling from the grave, you say, he wants his funeral to be X amount. So I always, it always confuses me when you are being told you cannot rule from the grave.
so I think important is that the will is ready quite some time after usually. It's not at the same time. So your wishes in terms of what my funeral is, people can plan and lay it out and explain this is what I want to happen. And ruling from the grave is going to be, I'm going to leave the house to my daughter, provided she never marries anybody of the same sex. I can't rule from the grave. Apart from the fact that that's going against common law, I can't say that she can only inherit the house if she qualifies with a university degree. I can't.
That's a thing.
So it can't contravene common law, and it can't be something that the person has to live up to at a further date.
Also, you can't stipulate that they must have what is real or stuff like that. So it's invalid.
So you could absolutely, they would take it to court potentially. You could say that I'm leaving it into a trust until they turn 30, unless they've obtained a university degree before. Now you've got an end date, but if something happens prior, then they can get it before. So that's not saying you can only inherit if you do this.
It's just running short on time.
We're running very short, and I'm going
Can we do questions maybe towards the end? If we can get through the.
Yeah, or else we're going to keep you all up. I'm happy. I've got lots of energy. Last question here, yes.
I believe that you have to have them. No evidence. If you give me 2 minutes, I'll explain why. This is Roman law. And another country that I'm going to explain is in Saxon law. And a family member of ours passed away without any will. We didn't know. The government itself took well over a third
Our government.
of the estate
No. In the,
in the UK. It's Saxon. And the researchers who can quote any price they like for researching and finding everyone who's entitled to tuppence, if you will, took over another third of the estate because she didn't have a will. Now, they've attempted to alter the law as regards the researchers, but they're not managed it. They can research and charge you whatever they consider was their time. That's why I say to everybody, have a will.
well, I think
And that's
Ian has probably summed up one of our slides. We can shorten it very quickly on there, but you're right. A will is critically important. If we look at it, and I think Zanae probably does this slide better than anybody. Why do we need it? Ian said so. Not only did Ian say so, we've got peace of mind. You know that what you want to happen is going to happen. You've got the opportunity of choice. Who do you wish your executive to be? Who do you wish your inheritance, your beneficiaries to be? What do you want it to be done? How do you want it to be done? And I think what is extremely important is not that anybody in this room, listening online, can actually say that this is what I want from today till eternity comes. It will change. And what is very important is that you can change your will as your circumstances and your needs change. So let's make sure that we've got the choice, make sure that we've got it tax efficient, make sure that we know what we're doing. And I think what's important is once the will is drafted, signed, that you then just re-go over it and say, what do I want? And does this document actually list that correctly? And if it does, you have a great situation and a great will in place. When should you update your will, Lindsay? Tell us.
Well, I would say your major life events, so getting married,
Getting divorced?
having children, all of those elements where new people are possibly coming into your life, adopting children, all of those kind of things to make sure that you are taking care of them. Or if an heir has passed away, so if you've left your will to your spouse and you haven't nominated an alternative beneficiaries, you could potentially pass away intestate, and you want to avoid that.
Say that again, sorry. Say that again.
If one of your heirs has passed away, and then you want to draft and you change your will, amend your will, just in case you don't want to pass away intestate, because then you haven't nominated an
But
alternative
in a case
beneficiary.
like that, don't you put something in like, if one of the children have passed away before you, then the money then, their portion then goes to the grandchildren?
Yes, yes,
That's okay.
yeah, that's okay, yeah.
I think, and just to elaborate on Lindsay's, when should you change it? I would say every year, go back and revisit it. Because that gives you the opportunity to realize that somebody's not signed it properly, that your wish has changed. It may very well stay, but it gives you the opportunity to just adapt and adopt your changes to it as you need to. So I think it needs to be a working document that is kept alive and real, and you know where it is, what your wishes are, etc. Particularly when we have split families, and in this day and age, that's very real. So it's extremely important that you don't leave those problems to the people that's going to be left behind to sort out and deal with some of the issues that need to be dealt with. We're professionals up at the top here. We have certified, we are CFBs, almost kind of getting there. We are members of PISA. We are here to help and to guide. We're not the only people that are there. We're an extensive amount of people available. I think the important thing is to find somebody you can trust, to make sure that you're talking with them, that they are aware of all of the costs, the taxes, nobody can draw up a will if they don't know what you have. It is impossible. If they have not asked questions of your business, of your trusts, of your, and you might say, but a trust has got nothing to do with my estate. Well, how did those assets get into the trust? The planner needs to know all those things in order to be able to draft a will for you. So I would encourage every single person to make sure that the person who is working with them with their wills is somebody that they trust, they know what the costs and the taxes are going to be. And it would be amiss of me not to actually chat around the Discovery Estate Preserver that Discovery have. It's a product that is similar to an indemnity product in the sense that it covers any executive fees or any trust fees or any capital gains tax or not capital gain transfer fees. So the Discovery Estate Preserver is an indemnity product that you can buy to say my estate is worth 20 million. We know by default that your taxes are going to be A, B, and C, and therefore you insure your life so that at time of death, all of those costs are covered. So it's an extremely beneficial product, in my opinion, for anybody with minor children. Anytime there is a testamentary trust that is going to be set up, I believe that it's got its place. The costs of running a trust can be extensive. You don't want those fees to be eating into the capital value. So the Discovery Estate Preserver pays those fees for a 10-year period, which gives you the bulk of the time for the child to be educated, etc. So anybody with minor children, an absolute gem of a product in our opinion, and certainly has its place in terms of covering the executive fees, as well as any transfer fees and taxes that could be applicable there.
And I asked them,
Yes.
so the previous marriage, we had. And, as far as I know, so they, the arm doing well, but I don't know if you can mention it, what happened. She died and it's obligated to.
So I always explain a trust in a very simple way to say it's almost like a company. So the trust has a trust deed, which is your company documents that tells you how you're allowed to behave and what you're allowed to do. You have trustees in a trust that tell you what you're allowed to do with in terms of those rules of the trustee, as you would have directors. So if he, as a trustee, passed away, the other trustees would then determine what happens and the trustee would explain. The fact that
Property.
if you are a trustee on that trust, you have every right to all of the information. If you are a beneficiary, then that trustee could have changed, they could have changed the rules of engagement, etc. So that if you're a trustee, you have every right to know and understand. It's very complicated because there's vesting trusts, non-vesting trusts, etc. So we need to see what that trustee was at its start, what assets it held, and then we would be able to sort of go back to say whether or not you had a vested right or whether you didn't. If you're a trustee, you should know what's going on. If you're a beneficiary, you'll only know when the trustees decide that they want to distribute to beneficiaries, if they ever do. So the trustee is the document that's going to answer a lot of your questions. That you had an asked question. Yes, we're going to finish off and then I'm going to answer your
They store wealth, but they also lose.
And they also still.
This is happened. Does that mean then the corporate is okay?
No, it must be.
So then you suit that?
You could if you chose
Is
to.
that the answer?
I wouldn't waste my time and my money. I would sign a new one and get it sorted fast and furious.
It happens.
I know it does, I know. And that's why it's very important that you've got registration numbers, etc. Because if you have a number, they should be able to trace. But we're going to carry on and then I'm happy to pick up the conversation, but I don't want to keep everybody.
Sorry, I'm waiting for the dancing girls.
They are, not tonight. If we just have a look at it, we spoke about minimizing your taxes, making sure it's efficient. Don't lose sight of some of the tools that are available to you to make your estate tax efficient. Policies outside of the estate in terms of retirement annuities. Those are not considered as part of the estate from an estate duty perspective. Looking at having beneficiaries on policies, endowment policies, so it's paid directly to the person inheriting, the beneficiary, without the executor needing to take their 3.5%. So there are lots of tips, tricks, tools, etc. that's available. And that's why the previous slide says speak to a professional. Make sure that you're talking. I always say to clients, have 5 people sitting around the table. Yourself as the business owner, as the client, your attorney who's ticking all of the boxes for the legal aspects of it, your accountant who's looking after the tax side of it, your banker who hopefully is going to be able to fund you through your capital and your wealth growth, etc., over your time, over your lifetime, and then your financial planner who wears multiple hats. Your attorney is not looking at the tax aspect. The tax guy is not looking at the legal aspects of it. So those 5 people are going to be the best people in plotting and planning a road for you. And those are the people, Paul, that should know all of you, what your wishes are, what your plans are, more so than your family potential. And I think
I just want to add in there, sorry to interrupt you. next month we will mention our topic, but we will be looking at the offshore space. And I think Discovery's got a lot of great offerings to assist in investing offshore. A lot of people have families or living offshore and things like that these days. So that can also be a great tax planning tool.
Lindsay is quite right. Discovery launched in July an international section of the business where they took the top 40 financial advisors in the country that are supporting offshore business. Discovery Dollar Life Plans, Discovery Dollar Investments, taking money offshore, Isle of Man, etc. And you are in the premises of one of those top 40 advisors in the country, where we actually have been recognized for the amount of international business that we do in terms of all of our offering locally as well as offshore. And that becomes a whole new ballgame. A lot of the laws and rules that Ian refers to come into play, etc. Yeah, so very well positioned in terms of that. And I have a list of the process. We'll share the slides with you. Remember, they're on the Discovery on the Syntony Camden 2020 website. If you're questioning what is the next step of it, there are 17 points in terms of what the process is, in terms of winding up an estate. And I think to just continue in your leaflet that you've taken home there is a very long, extensive list. We have done with Discovery and work through Nikki Bush. I don't know if any of you have heard of her. She has what she calls a what if happens file. And in that file is a list of documents that you would need to wind up an estate. And there's simple things of where is the title deeds for the house? Where are the car registration papers? Where are the usernames and passwords for social media? For anybody with Bitcoin or any of those weird and wonderful foreign types of investments that I can't quite wrap my head around. Who has those usernames and passwords? Because if they don't, you've lost it. Who has your unabridged birth certificate, marriage certificates, previous husbands, wives, deceased, liquidation and distribution accounts? So please work through that list. Please do not get scared. Start to build it slowly but surely. We're here to guide you. Make sure it's electronic so that God forbid there is a fire, it's there, it's safe, it's stored, and make sure that your loved ones know where it is. So that's our what if happens, which we believe is extremely, extremely important. Next month, as Lindsay has said, we're going to be going into the offshore, and we're going to be talking about offshore, international. Should we have money offshore? How much? Where? How? Why? What happens? Etc. And we'll be building that as we go through it. But at this stage, we're going to say, if there's a will, I'd like to be in it. And we hope that we can help and support you and answer any of your questions. Anything you'd like to ask before we close off and go and have a final drink and a snack? Yes. Okay.
One thing, you often hear people trying to hide money, when somebody's not well or whatever. Does the master pick up if somebody passes away and there is no money? There's nothing because he's already given it away or moved it to somebody else. Would you pick up that person didn't have any money?
That's a very difficult question to answer, in the sense that if I had 20 million and 6 months later I have nothing, where did it go?
Yeah, but how did the master know that you had 20 million in the first place?
Because you submitted tax returns,
Thanks.
you have all the title deeds,
Yeah.
you have all sorts. So anytime you can. Nothing stops you from saying, I have 20 million and I'm going to give it to my friend.
Yes.
But they must pay donations tax.
That's it for donation.
And donations tax is the same tax rate as estate duty, because that's exactly what people were doing. Just before they would pass away, they would donate their whole estate. You pay,
Give it to the children.
you pay exactly the same amount of tax,
And what percentage is that?
20%.
And
On-
25 above the 10.
Yes.
Sorry.
25% above the 10 of you.
So the donor
Out of
out of the funds,
Not the recipient.
not the recipient, the donor.
It's
Well,
to have a few copies.
technically, SARS doesn't care where they get the money from. As long as they get it, as long as they get it. Yeah, they don't care who's paying, as long as they're getting it.
I think, yeah, Claude has asked a very valid question there. In any of the wills that we do, we actually print in triplicate. One will gets kept in safekeeping and storage. One will goes across to the member, to the client themselves, and another goes on site so that it's there. And we know it's there.
But
So
that's,
anybody working with us, we have that principle at hand.
you've got three originals
We
then.
have three originals.
Something to go back on that donations tax is there's no donations tax between spouses.
But if you let it, if you gave it to the children.
Your children.
Then they have to pay, 20%.
Yes, or yeah, usually the donor pays, but someone has to pay from the funds.
It's a very valid point. If we go back to, poor old Robert and his 3 million estate, if it's going to be left to the children, there may be an estate duty implication. In his case, it was 3 million, there isn't. But if it were 13 million, there would be. And then suddenly the people who are receiving that inheritance must pay the estate duty. And if you're leaving a property to somebody and there's an estate duty implication, they need liquidity in order to be able to pay that tax. Or they may well be selling that property in order to pay the estate duty, which is the purpose of time. And ladies and gents, that brings us to the end. Where are we? We're on camera. So thank you very much for your time and your attendance. Please join us for some snacks and some drinks. And